Full standing without power. Intro would be pretty standard. G'day, my name's Ross. I'm going to do this briefing today. It'll take about an hour and 10 minutes. We might have a break depending on how we go, but I'll let you know. Any questions, if you want, please don't hesitate to ask as we go through. I'm quite happy to answer those as we do it. With the intro, what I'd really be talking about here is that we've already a full standing without power, probably just define what that is. What it is an engine failure. And instead of in the circuit, we're going to be doing it en route, so maybe on a navigation flight. Halfway to our destination, and we start having some issues with the engine. So it's a forced landing, a landing which we're forced to do, and we have no power. Fun fact for if you're really interested, we're going to do a forced landing with power, and that's going to be later on in your training. Today we're talking about landing without any power. And we've actually already previously identified some of the reasons that the engine might fail. And we looked at the engine failure after takeoff and the glide approach in the circuit. So we're just expanding on that and really just developing a procedure around it on how we actually deal with it as we're flying along. So we're going to go through the procedure and in particular the most correct procedure to adopt should we get an engine failure en route somewhere. Pretty much repeating what I've said there with the objective, but that's the simplified version. To learn the recommended procedure in case we get an engine failure above 1,000 feet. So what is it? It has been developed to maximise the chances of a safe landing off-field. So one where you and your passengers survive and are not harmed. The way we achieve that is we're actually flying a circuit type procedure around a selected landing point. And in this case, what we're going to do as we get a bit further into the brief, I'm actually going to build this circuit pattern around this great depiction here of a field that we've selected to land in. The objective is, or the why we're doing it, is to survive. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. I've had two. So yeah, although it's quite unlikely, modern aircraft are generally quite reliable, but there are still reasons, and because they're so infrequent, it's actually even more important that we know what to do should it happen. And I've done two, so there you go. Here's a good example of why you might need to know it. And here's a picture of a field. This is actually a Neo 367. And you can see we've got there with the white line with the red dots, a circuit type procedure where the aircraft is essentially planned to fly the joiner left down one base final to land in that field. And that's the ideal pattern we'd want to fly. Cool bananas, this slide, just sort of sticking out of the brief, has put my FIC instructor hat on. This slide is the same as what we've done in the FATE maths brief, so it's just revision, nothing new. You can do it the same way as you did it with that lesson, but hey, what are some of the issues? Hey, why didn't you get fuel contamination? You probably want to reiterate, I'm not sure what, have you guys done the FATE brief? You would have done that. Did you go into any of the stats around this stuff? What's the most common one?
Fuel contamination.
Yeah, it's actually fuel starvation is the most common cause of a engine failure. And it's in the 90 percentages, in the 90th percent, whatever it is, in the 90s, that's going to be probably a fuel starvation issue. That's the most common. You've got fuel starvation, fuel exhaustion, some sort of air blockage, an issue with your spark, with your magnetos, and then a mechanical problem, and we're talking about failures and things like that. The first one I had was somewhere in between spark and mechanical issue, where the engine stopped, propeller stopped moving, it did not windmill, wasn't windmilling, which was normal for that aeroplane, where what you need to do is turn the key. If you can't do an air start, you do a key start. Literally the flight manual says not to worry, don't worry, because you can turn the key, but I turned the key, nothing happened. Turned it about 200 times and nothing happened. The starter motor wasn't engaging, so there's a problem. The starter motor, so whatever you want to call there. The second one I had was fuel. Fuel wasn't getting to the engine, there was a fuel leak. One of my classmates in my Massey class had one where air was an issue. We'll see a photo of that later. And they had carb icing. And the engine stopped because there wasn't any air getting into the engine. I can't think of anyone else who's done them. Anyway, you can, same thing, rattle off all the same causes and talk about all that sort of stuff. Obviously, stuff you want to probably end this slide on is talking about pre-flight. Doing a proper pre-flight training, the fuel, whether you got that black shit on it. Most of this stuff is, you want to end all these slides and discussion points about, okay, how do we prevent this, or what are we going to do about it? You might not have seen this already. Have we seen this slide? I know it's in a brief, but it might be covered up.
It's covered up.
Anyway, so this might be the first time your students see this. Just to explain it really simply, we've looked at that lift curves and drag curves. We're just putting the two together, plotting them against each other. Lift to drag ratio, it's how much lift versus how much drag. You can see our best lift to drag ratio happens here. It's about 12 to 1. So 12 units of lift to 1 of drag. And that's happening at 4 degrees angle of attack. Okay, any angle of attack above or below that, guess what happens? What's the enemy of flight? Not the CAA. Drag. So any angle of attack above or below that, we get an increase in drag. And what does increase in drag do to our glide? Yeah, we have to steepen it up. What happens to our range?
Reduces.
So if we're gliding somewhere, what if this happened halfway across Cook Strait? Guess what? We want to flight the best lift to drag ratio 4 degrees, and this is where we get our best glide speed. Just literally summing all that up with the model without having to repeat every point, hopefully, but you can if you want to. If you CCATS, you probably will. What's the best glide speed?
Depends on your weight.
73 to 75, make sure the first thing you do is trim it. I'm already building some of the exercise here as we go through it. Laying the old breadcrumbs for the student to eventually get to the point of this is why it's so important we do this procedure. We've seen this before, I'm sure. It's literally just doing exactly what I just said with the model. If you want to redo it, skip it if you want. So yeah, to summarise, any speed above or below, so if we're at 80 knots or at 70 knots, we're probably not going to be able to go as far. What does wind do to our glide? You can probably have a bit of a discussion here about maybe if we're in a tailwind, what's that going to do to our range? It's going to extend it, but what happens if what about our landing distance? Yeah, what's going to be better? What's going to be probably the most important thing there? Maximum range or landing the shortest distance? Where are we landing? Field, pretty short field. Probably the most important things for us is going to be landing in that short distance. There may be situations where a tailwind is actually what you might want to do, particularly if you are something like overcooked straight on, definitely sit in the tailwind. If I have to ditch, then I might at 1,000 feet turn around and into wind to ditch to arrive at the slowest possible speed. But how do we actually determine it? Windsock. Nah, not in that field unless it's an airstrip. What else are we going to use? Aphid? Oh, hang on. No. These are all the reasons here, and you can go through each one. They're probably in the order of what you need. Smoke and dust, as you know. The most important there and easy to identify, wind shadows. So we're talking about wind shadows on the water, wind lanes on crops and stuff like that. Stock, I don't believe this whatsoever. So some stock, it's particularly really gusty conditions, might go into a sheltered part of the paddock or something like that. You can maybe identify where the wind's is coming from. All of this stuff, cloud shadows, yeah, it's all great stuff, local knowledge, but the main thing you're going to be looking out for is smoke and dust. Best thing you can do is already know what the wind is doing before you get into this situation. So as you're flying along on the route, look out for these indicators and have that in the back of your mind. Trust me, when the engine stops, your performance is going to go through the floor for about 10-15 seconds. You're not going to be able to do anything, and even then after that you're going to be so stressed out and panicking. Already knowing where the wind is going to be a huge help for you. It's going to be hard to try and at that point start thinking about where the wind is and looking out for wind indicators. So already know where it's going to be or what it's doing. Is it going to be a lifesaver? Right, and here's some good pictures. That's how easily identifiable it is. Which airplane are we flying? Don't know, it's a Cherokee. So that's actually a pretty good amount of smoke. Usually it's a lot smaller than that, but we can hopefully determine what the wind's doing. It looks like it's pretty calm, it's going straight up. Calm and variable, that's actually a really good thing for us. It means that we could probably land whichever way we wanted to. Flying another Cherokee, anyone can see the smoke there? Turn the lights down.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit there, we zoom in, this is what it looks like. So where's the wind coming from? So this is with all these photos. You can talk about it, you can get your class involved, talk about all the other stuff. I tend not to talk about too much else in terms of where we're landing until we get to that point. Some of these photos are recycled, like I know this one is. We talk about surrounds and stuff like that. You could always go back to them as well when you click that. Like that window poppy out one button on the bottom. Does everyone know how to do that? You can go back if you want to talk about some other stuff in this photo once we've actually talked about it. But yeah, where's the wind coming from? Oh yeah, that way. Which way would we want to land? Southeast, if you're looking at it, it's a compass. Which way from the coast towards the land? Pretty, actually not usual to see it that way. Usually it's a sea breeze. If you really want to, just the advantage of looking out there and you can almost instantly tell which way the wind's going. It can give you an instant picture without having to do too much extra work. If you don't have smoke, we're going to have to start looking at other stuff. The next most easily identifiable one is wind shadows. You can draw a little diagram on this if you want. So you can talk about how most dams will have, see, in fact it's a dam, not a river, means there's a little spherical divot which it's sitting in, and it always has banks usually. So it usually has a bank on any side. So what's happening is the wind's coming up from one direction, goes over the top and hits the water here, causing ripples, and we get a calm patch. A calm patch is where the direction of the wind is coming from. So in this picture here, where's the wind coming from? Cool. what a lot of people don't understand here as well is that the field needs to be in between you and the sun. I know the sun is not really too bad. If the sun is behind you, it's not going to be able to see it, it's going to be sitting in the shadow. Okay, so always get the field, sorry, the lake in between, or the dam or whatever it is, in between you and the sun. You've all experienced that. When it's in shadow you can't really see it. If you continue turning around it, you'll be able to see it. And we can see there, you can see how reflective it is. So let's show you what all these are just going through it real basic. Got an animation showing where it's coming from. We've got a lake there and a very calm bit there if you can see it. That's where the wind's coming from. Got to be careful about anything with a current. So the ocean, rivers, stuff like that, unless it's something really clear like that. You've obviously got water currents which are going to create ripples and things like that. Cloud shadows moving, that's great, but that's showing the wind at altitude, not the wind on the ground. So if you've got nothing else, then cloud shadows might be your sort of the only thing you can use. So once we determine the wind, then we're going to make some decisions and start making some plans around how we're going to do this procedure. Range, increase with the tailwind, reduce with the headwind. Might be really important for the initial part of this procedure is to actually maybe use that tailwind if you want to glide further. If I'm not far from an aerodrome and I've got a tailwind, we might consider trying to get to that aerodrome. But just knowing what the wind strength is doing and how this wind is going to affect my glide is going to be really important because it does change. If I'm flying into a 20 knot headwind, obviously my range is reduced a lot more than it would be with no wind. So being aware of what the wind is doing, where it's coming from, how's that going to affect my procedure, where should I look to land? Maybe the field that's within range and no wind is not in range anymore with the wind that we've currently got. So building a picture, building a plan. Pretty self-explanatory there, don't fly low. There's three things a pilot should never worry about, you know what they are? Shouldn't be concerned with too much with how much height's above you, how much air's in the tank, how much runway's behind you. If you're worrying about those things, you've got to completely back to front. So always fly as high as you can, depending on your situation. For instance, Cook Strait, who's quite happy to go across Cook Strait at 2,000 feet? I hate it. Even 2,500, I don't like it. In fact, there was a period of time where I just wouldn't do it. I just tell students, no, I can't be. Cool, anyway. Fly high as you can, extends your range. We can kind of talk about this slide here as we're quite high, aren't we? We're probably about 5,000 feet. Do you think we'll be able to make that township? You probably could, just having a look at that currently. So if there's an airstrip, usually most towns of this size might have an aerodrome, might have an airstrip. Obviously that might be a saving grace for the day to be able to land and glide towards that aerodrome, because at least, or airstrip, at least we know it's going to be long enough to hopefully land safely. But if we're only 1,000 feet AGL here, we definitely wouldn't be able to make it that far. Here we are in the southern training area. It looks like we're about 2,000 feet, maybe 2,500. It's hard to tell in these photos, but we can visualise a range depending on the wind and our height of where we're going to go. The more practice you do, the more hours you get under the belt, particularly the more practice you do with this procedure, the better you're going to be able to make this judgment, and that's going to be able to figure out that basically where we're going to land has to be within this range here. Cool? Got the wind, we figured out where we can go, where are we actually going to land. You're never going to find a perfect field. Always be on the lookout for things like airstrips and aerodromes and things like that. If you know where's some really good airstrips, it's going to solve a lot of the problems we're going to encounter in a minute as we go through each consideration. The main thing we've got to remember, it's a compromise. We've got to find a field which is going to result in a safe landing. One where we can survive. It doesn't have to be a perfect landing. If we damage the aircraft, who cares, it's insured. What we want to protect are the people inside. So it's a compromise, and we've got some factors we're going to consider. We don't have too much time. Ideally, if you already have some ideas of where some good places might be to land, just like where the wind is coming from, it's going to make this a lot easier for you. How do you do it? Success is big E. These are what they are. You can go through and define these if you want, but we're going to go through them in a bit more detail individually. Size. What are we talking about here? The length available. Is a field with 200 metres going to be okay?
Probably not.
You don't think it will be? You'll be hunting for a long time trying to find a field longer than that. But you can start throwing some numbers around. What about 500 metres? Is that okay? 300? Might be 200. What about 100 metres? No, definitely not. So it's going to be somewhere in between probably that 200 to 500 metres. You're not going to get too many fields longer than that, but we want something, again, where we can have enough space and size, where we've got enough distance to hopefully land as slow as possible, under control, and allowing that environment to absorb the impact. Do you guys know what all that means? I'm not sure if it was covered in the photo. So this is again coming back from some stats. So arriving as slow as possible, under control, you know what that means? Not stalled. Okay? And allowing the environment to absorb the impact, so going through trees and fences and stuff like that, is where you're going to survive. The main bit there is under control. As long as you touch down and you're under at a reasonable speed, you haven't stalled it, you will survive. The chances of surviving are really high. As long as you're not under control, that's the opposite way. The chances of surviving are really low. So this is more of a teaching thing, but just make sure you're not getting too slow, and it's better just to come in under control without trying to do crazy. We'll look to that in mountain flying, hopefully, not trying to do crazy turns at 100 feet, trying to get into somewhere, just come in. So that's what we actually need to survive. What does that look like? Okay, so you can go through all these examples. So, you know, some fields. That's a pretty big one there. Look at that size there. That would be survivable to land in there. What about this little one here? Maybe, but the chances are going down, aren't they? So what are some sort of fields here? You can point them out, you get students to point them out. You can spend 10 minutes on each photo if you really want. But pick out some which are pretty good size. This is obviously in the out to the southern training area. That's a pretty good field to do it in. This one's got a fence in it. That one, for obvious reasons, is no good, but hey, there's instructors. You've got buildings there, so you probably don't want to use those too. What about these little ones here? Is that okay? Is that going to be long enough? It probably is. That's probably about 200-300 metres. What about these ones here? Oh, that's way longer. Pick some good ones, pick some bad ones, discuss it. If you can, you probably want to find the biggest one. There's obviously things like cattle and surface and that, which are going to come up in a minute, which we can talk about. Shape. What's the best shape? Yeah, cool, most people will automatically go for that runway looking thing, because that's what we're used to. This is a good example, you can see where they've been doing the baling, how it's actually got some lines for us to follow. You can talk about squares actually okay, because you can do the diagonals, which increases the size of your landing distance. This one here is actually good, if you go corner to corner, that's actually quite a long distance. Versus trying to go up and down these little ones here. See, this one down here is really good. Talk about this stuff as much as little as you want. Slope. For ease of reference, there is an airstrip here, which now comes up with a little shape to show you what it's doing. So obviously that's a slope that's going uphill and downhill. That's a one-way airstrip pretty much, but yeah, which way would you want to land? Hopefully uphill. As a general rule of thumb, your slope is always going to be more meaningful than wind. That doesn't mean we land uphill with a tailwind. It just means if you've got very little wind, or maybe even a crosswind, and you can go uphill, that's probably going to result in a much shorter landing distance than trying to land into the 2-knot headwind on another field. Downhill, obviously, is something we want to avoid unless we absolutely got no other options. Another little airstrip here. Just the shape should come up, this thing stopped working. But do you know which way the slope's going?
It's going up away from
Yeah, it's going from the bottom to the top. You can tell because that's where the cliff is off the edge. Surface, hey, what are these brown paddocks? Anyone here from a farm? Mate, are you the city slickers, eh? So, what does that look like? Has anyone seen a ploughed paddock up close? They're pretty deep divots. You wouldn't even get a car across some of those fields that do a lot of damage. So they look kind of short and good from altitude sometimes. It's good to go, this is why when you teach it, you do it at 1,000 feet initially, as you're kind of pointing through some of this stuff, because you can see it in a bit more detail. You can't see them here, but you'll see that darkish green, kind of just slightly darker than that field there, which means crop. Usually plantain or something which is about a foot tall, which again, not great for landing. And so what we're really looking for are the light green. You can get into the debate about drag and versus braking authority if you really want. Here's some more. Now, here's a fun fact. I landed in this one. But you can't see it, but there it is. Or is it this one here? This power line's going across somewhere in here. Where is it? Can't see it, but anyway, I couldn't see it until I was on final. So bad, good. That's crop. Go through the surface as much as you want. Surrounds, back to this photo. Stuff we really probably want to talk about are these tree lines. How tall are they? What does that mean? You can use the diagram if you want, start talking about how you'd have to land a bit further into the field. It's a bit like going into fox blind. Maybe around the banks and the river, what happens if we overrun? That's something we kind of have to think about. If we landed in this field here, probably maybe one of these ones into wind, what's the overrun like? Are we going through trees, or could we sneak it through that fence there and whatever? So you can see how all of these are just discussion points. Doesn't look too bad on that one. Uphill slope in the corner of that little field there, pretty good. This is what it looks like on final. So this is really just showing the 3D effect of how something, the trees go from they're looking okay, you can't really see the depth too much, to seeing it a bit closer up. Now that's still okay, that might be something you're still going to the engine stops there for any choice in the matter. But, you know, are you going to be able to clear these trees? What happens if you end up being landing short? So that's going to be a consideration. What happens if we're going to run through these trees here? Is that okay to do? It depends on all those other factors. It might be something this is the only choice we have, and as long as we're arriving here as slow as possible, we can still allow that environment to absorb the impact. Hopefully by the time we're there, they're pretty slow. Which aeroplane's listed now?
172.
Yep. So early morning, late afternoon, that might also be a big consideration about which direction you'd land. Is it better to take a 2-knot tailwind than to try and land in a 2-knot headwind like this? Probably that's something you might have to determine. 3 elevations, down there, and there. That's obviously our height, how much height we've got for the field, but it can also be doing our approach. So if we're flying that circuit pattern around some high terrain, that might be an issue. Do we need to change our approach a little? Can we do that? How are we going to manage the pattern with the varying elevation? How high are we? The altimeter's not going to tell you. Got to get good at looking down and judging. Cool. 30 minutes so far in this brief, and this is where we've got to. If it's a real class, we probably would have spent maybe a little bit more getting a bit more feedback and discussion going with a lot of these photos, even though I felt like I spent way too long talking about each one. So it might be a good point to have a break, everyone go and use the toilet and grab a drink or whatever. Cool. What we're talking about here is also in an animation looking top down. So you don't necessarily need to use this if you don't want to. But at this point, we're kind of assuming the engine has failed. What I'd probably do is set up the scene where after this side, I'm going to get you and start drawing some stuff on here. So we've been flying along, the engine's failed. If we're really good pilots, what do we already know?
The wind direction.
Yep, the wind direction, hopefully maybe somewhere where we might land and something like that. If we already know the wind direction, we can actually immediately start positioning the aircraft correctly. Now this might be a little bit confusing, but let's have a look at this pattern here. We've got the wind direction, we've got a field. Do we want to do a right-hand pattern or a left-hand pattern? Left, so we can see it. What we're going to do is say we'll touch down here, and if we're flying this ideal pattern, we'll kind of be doing a left pattern. I'm just going to spiral our way backwards to show that circuit type pattern. So depending on our height, we're going to be wanting to be at different places along this pattern at different heights. So at 500 feet, where would I want to be? Right, so there at 500. So if we were 500 feet, we've pretty much got to make sure we're into wind. What about 1,000 feet? Somewhere in the downwind part, maybe a little bit further in if we're doing a glide approach. So 1,000 to 1,500, maybe 2,000 feet up, somewhere around there. So depending on our height, we're going to be positioning in a certain way. If we're above 3,000 feet, so we're coming along, the engine's stopped, and we're above 3,000, we're going to turn into wind, and which direction, where would we look to find a suitable field? On our left. Okay? So Turn into one, look left. There should be hopefully somewhere out there where we can land. What if we were below 2,500?
Some,
Join crosswind with the wind on our right. Where's the field? On our left. Bit of a theme going here, eh? Below 1,500 feet. You're flying along, engine stops, bang.
it's gonna be on our left.
Turn downwind. Look out to your left. Cool? So we're hopefully positioning ourselves somewhere on this pattern where the field's going to be on the left. This animation is literally just what I did there. So I'll probably skip it. Or you can explain what I did on the board with this animation if you really like. This thing's not working. But it's the same thing, we're just positioning ourselves. In the right part of the pattern with everything on the left, hopefully. Best case scenario, let's say we've got plenty of height and we're at 3,000 feet. We know what the wind's doing, the engine's stopped, we've positioned the aeroplane correctly. I'm not going to write it all out here, but this is how I'll be doing it. What's the first thing we do? Immediate actions. And I'd probably write them up as I went. Or just put immediate actions in there. So at least we've got students got something there to do the procedure. But definitely trim for the best glide speed and do our immediate actions. We've done this in a FATO, so hopefully the students know what they are. Change tanks, touch check, mixture full rich, pump on. Now that is a touch check now. As per all of our SOPs. Who checks for fire? Do you know how to check for fire? What you do, you set yourself on the glide, you change the tanks, you put the mixture full rich, and then you put your thumb onto the fuel pump, and then you look over the cowling and you yaw the aeroplane left and right. If there's no smoke bellowing out the front cowlings, you put the pump on. If there's smoke, you take your hand away from that. Okay, so that's something you ideally should be doing, just checking for any fire. Twin engine, pretty easy, just turn your head. But single engine, if you yaw it left and right a little bit, you'll see if there's any smoke coming out quite clearly. Hold the air open, both. What I'd really be emphasising here is, 75 knots. I'll probably do a different colour for some of the really important things. Definitely be using a different colour for this bit. I'm going to be emphasising in between all of these checks, we're actually going to come back and look out and figure out what our approach is doing. So the next bit is plan the approach. So 2, plan, and essentially we've already hopefully worked our way backwards, put these points in. Everyone does this to way too close, almost a beam. It's got to be about 45 degrees offset. It's the high key area, the low key point directly at beam. There, right? And here they are on this picture. I've already got it on the I don't know why that's moved up to the left and changed that. Anyway, got it on there. Trouble checks. The main thing we see students do here, students way too quick. So I'm a big believer in doing this quite methodically and slow like you would in real life. So, engine page, throttle, set third, propeller, high, fuel, check contents, mixtures full, rich, full pump is on, fuel flow is whatever, mixture, cycling that, and we're checking the RPM as this happens to see if there is any changes. Ignition, left, right, back to both, throttle, let's check for power. That's how quickly I'll be teaching it. Trouble checks, and this is where I'd be jumping in here with probably some numbers up here. 1, 2, where are we up to? Playing the approach 3. You can do it here or here, but I'll be going with assess. Really important that in between these checks we're actually assessing it. Okay, what are we actually doing there? We're here, probably somewhere, we're looking here, we're going to be thinking about how we're going to make it, what's the wind doing, shit, have we gone way too far out here, did we get distracted? Now's the point to fix it and make sure we're going to make here at 1500 feet. It's more important to get this pattern right than it is to do the next set of checks. Not many people know how to do it. Mayday call, go. Someone have a go, yep.
Mayday, Manawa 2 traffic, Massey 701 is 2 to the west of Shannon. Had an engine failure. Force landing.
It's not position, altitude, intentions. Do anyone know what it is?
Is it nature of?
Here, Mayday, what's the most important thing here? After that?
Engine failure.
Right, the nature of the emergency, what is it? Mayday, 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 all stations, Massey 864, engine failure 3 north of Shannon, intending to land in a field passing 3,000 feet. Oh, we're going to continue to land in the field 3 north of Shannon, whatever it's going to be. Anyway, do your Mayday call. Here's some examples. So again, kind of just building it as we go. I'm not going to keep writing stuff, but we're sort of numbering it as you go. Build a bit of a picture. Passenger brief. The stuff I'd be talking about here is the passenger brief card. Did we give them a briefing before we went? No one even does prop ones. So have you given them a brief before you went? What do you want them to do for the rest of this?
Distract themselves.
Shut up, sit there and say nothing and do nothing. So what we really want to do is reassure them, get them compliant, get them not interfering with what you're doing. I'd be giving them the passenger brief card again, saying please refamiliarise yourself with that, give them something to do. The last one I did, I got the student to do squawk codes and things, even though I knew that, so I'd already done it. I gave them a job to do with the GRH, even though I'd done it. But good enough one just to make sure we'd done it, but it also gives them something to do. That wasn't panicking, freaking out. It's the last thing you want to do, give them something to do. So yeah, brief your passengers, make sure they know what they're doing. Develop your own passenger brief. You can do that yourself. I try and make mine a little bit more, not lying, but sort of not trying to use language and terms which might frighten them. So I'd be saying things like, hey, we've got a bit of engine problems and we're not going to be able to make it all the way to our destination. I think it's better if we actually land in this airstrip down here on down here, and actually we'll sort out the problem and, before it gets worse. Even though it's not an airstrip, it's a field and there's no getting energy going in because it's on fire or whatever. What I need you to do is just make sure you get your seatbelt on. Here, I'll give you this passenger with the card again. Just make sure you read over that again. The whole talking about, if we're upside down, you're going to have to do this, and here's the first aid kit. That's going to start frightening them even more. So building this picture as you go, we're here at our 1500 foot area. this is what it should look like. Are we within glide range? Yes. Is it looking like it's a bit more, slightly higher than your sort of circuit height, sort of your joint height? Yes, well that's perfect. At this point, this is where we need to really start focusing on getting everything ready to land. So we've tried to fix it straight away. We've planned an approach. We've done heaps of checks to try and fix it. We've been assessing the approach. We've given our passengers a bit of a brief. So now it's just about getting everything ready to actually land here. We've told everyone, done a mayday call as well. So at this point, we really want to make sure there's no risk of fire or anything happening with the engine. The last thing we wanted to be doing is in the flare, the engine bursts back into life. Sometimes that can happen with the fuel. When you tilt the aircraft back, pitch up, if you've got a fuel exhaustion situation, sometimes the fuel can actually start, a little bit that was in the tank is now going into the fuel line back into the engine. Last thing you want is an extra 20 seconds of power and then it to stop again. Because the paddock you chose and everything was perfect is now behind you. So let's secure it, make sure there's nothing, there's nothing on that doesn't need to be on. Fuel ignition, masters. Cool. Spacing. Slightly closer than normal circuit spacing. Okay, we are gliding. So as you can look at there, that's probably about halfway down the wingtip compared to 2/3. I know you don't know the type, but that's in the Cherokees, that's about halfway. So, slightly closer, tracking to our low key point, and we've shut the engine down, picking a point 1/3 of the way in. From that point, the low key point, 1,000 feet, it's just a glide approach. This is just the same as what we looked at in that circuits brief. So you're just reiterating or even just redoing what we talked about in that circuits brief. So starting your turns, going wings level, and you can assess the approach. We can look at the angle and we can look at the distance, the spacing. Particularly when we do go wings level, if it started moving away like that, it means we're getting pushed away from the field. We're getting further away, we need to turn towards it. So consider turning towards the field. Don't lie flat if you don't need to. Higher bank angles will reduce the range. So you can always go wings level if you find yourself doing a constant turn. That's going to be more drag. Grab the model for this and talk about these our field here. If we feel like we're in this turn and we're reasonably steep and we're not going to make it, we're getting lower and lower and lower. If we actually roll wings level, we can actually extend it a little bit before rolling back in. I would do this in this brief, is talk about the S-turn. It needs to be a proper S-turn. The ideal one is a 180-degree turn followed by a 90-degree turn, not a wiggle the wings, like I see a lot of people doing. It needs to be decent. So if you're really high, you can use flat, but go through the same type. Come back around. We're using more track miles doing that. Essentially what we're trying to do. But here's the ideal situation. We're on left base for that field. We're not too close. We've got enough space, so within 500 feet we can still glide straight into the field. And we're not too far away. The last thing we want to do, you don't want to be probably much further away than this when you're looking at the field. If there's a strong headwind, you might end up, if you're too far away, only able to land in these trees here, which wouldn't be good. Again, use the model. You've probably already seen it, but we're quite close here. But turning final 500 feet, if we are going to be landing a third of the way in, which is about there, we're coming in, it's all looking really good. We're going to definitely make the field. We can lower the flat, increase drag. What's going to happen? No, it's going to pitch up. It's not talking. What do you mean? Yeah, you're going to start slowing down. Now we can touch down, fly a bit steeper, touch down at the start of the field, also flying slower. Passenger brief card. You might want to talk about this if you want, about maximum braking. What does that mean? Does that mean skidding? What happens if you start to skid?
Cruise control.
Reapply. So let go, reapply, but you want firmer braking. Generally, the firmer braking, the slower you get. So you can start off a little bit firmer than normal. As you slow down, you can go heavier and heavier and heavier. Keep the cabinet intact. If you're going to go through a fence, try and get the cabin going through the posts or through the trees or something like that. Does everyone know what a ground loop is?
Tail dragging.
You can do it in a
Doing it.
tricycle if you want to. Which is essentially grab one full left rudder and just hit one brake and hopefully you get a tighter turn to come around. If you really want to avoid crashing into something. Here we go. There's the outcome. Is that a good scenario?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my classmate, Graham. I liked him. Anyway, that was the doing force landing practice, carb icing, went around, and then the engine stopped. Went back into the same field, but of course it was a little bit higher, ended up going into a ditch. There was a fire, but you can see everything. There's minimal damage, but the main thing is that the pilot was safe and walked away. And that was a really successful outcome. There's an even better outcome because I was doing it. No damage. Not a scratch. Don't look too far off in the distance, there's power lines there to fly under. Anyway, that's what we're trying to achieve here, is the safe landing. It doesn't matter, and again, you can come back to this, your nice big completed board with lots of different colour in that, but as you go through the trouble check today, which are these most important? No, it's finding the pattern and getting in there. I would much rather have someone do the immediate actions, fly the pattern, talk to their passengers, land, without doing any of that other stuff. And then get tangled up doing trouble checks. Oh, where's the field? Who's done that before? And they're all being a big disaster because you spent too long trying to do checks. This is kind of a bit more of a, hey, this is the stuff you need to do. Really important that you never admit liability to anybody. My first one that I did go through a fence, and when the cocky turned up, first thing he said was, everyone all right? I said, yep. And he said, who's going to replace my fence? So I had to very calmly say, well, I kind of had to dance around it and say, well, you know, I'm not sure whose fault it is or anything like that, but I said, I'm sure that someone's insurance will cover it. But if you start saying, oh yeah, no, it's my fault and all that sort of stuff, suddenly you personally are going to be on the hook for it. And I was doing it through work, so it's not my bloody people. I'm not taking any personal blame or liability, or have to go out there and start doing fencing on the weekends or start paying for it. So anyway, yeah, make sure you don't admit liability to anybody. The best thing you can probably say is, look, there's obviously a problem, but the CAA is going to probably determine all the cause and factors leading up to it. And that's the truth as well, because you don't know what caused it, even though you might be pretty sure, but there's probably other factors and stuff like that as well. So yeah, first aid, if you do need to do it, contact the ATC if you've done a mayday call to either stand down or get some more rescue if you need it. Don't admit liability. Secure the aircraft. The main thing you guys need to do is make sure you're taking your personal stuff out. Okay, so your headset, your phone, your iPad, make sure you take all of that out. Technically it's all now part of the CAA's property, And if the CA turn up, they can stop you from taking anything further. So phone, headset, cigarettes, out you go. Data card, if we end up using those again, make sure you take the data card. Last thing you want, CA and all that stuff. Security personal items. This sounds self-explanatory, but Paul will tell you he had a student who was just got too into it on the force landing, actually landed. So just had just so much of a good time doing it. Turned around, took off again, and he didn't know until they got back. So, as an instructor, you'll be on the hook for it. So never ever attempt to take off, even if it's a great field and all that sort of stuff. If you realise that you think you might know what the problem is, just the liability and the chances of happening on the takeoff is
Isn't there
really good.
Planet Mandela Nelson on one of those sandbars a couple of years back, and the guy put fuel in it, took back off
Yeah.
before the CE even knew about it.
And the problem is you'll go to jail if something happened on the takeoff and you took it into the public or something. Just who cares? Anyway, we're getting into some partial stuff. I wouldn't go too much into this when I'm briefing it. Probably this is going to be covered. I know I cover it when I do mountain flying. So I'd just be giving at this point just a brief overview of partial engine failure. We're actually going to look at this in mountain flight. We're at 1,000 feet with a lot less range, and what are we actually going to do and how are we going to do it? But essentially, a partial engine failure, you might still have power. Might be running rough, it might be 1800 RPM is all you get. So you're going to have to decide what you're going to do. Can you carry on or should you land? Can you make it to an aerodrome? Or is the engine going to stop completely? If you do think you can carry on for another 8 miles or something, is there places in between here and there where it's going to be okay to land? If you're over a big airstrip, is it better just to bloody land in it now? Who knows? You have to think about what's caused it. Are you running out of fuel? Is it a mechanical problem? Do you even know what the problem is? You could be getting into the fuel, running one tank completely dry and going over to the next tank, and that's only got a few gallons in it. How long is that going to last? If you can only maintain 90 knots, what does that mean for doing things like turns? The climbs, can you climb? You might find that you don't actually have enough power to climb. What about doing turning? What happens to drag? Yeah, so are you going to have to lower the nose in the turn? Lose some height? These are all considerations. So again, we'll talk about I'll briefly bring up those things to think about and just say we'll cover it later on in the training at CPL. Okay, training. When we're training, we've got to make sure we don't have a real one. And that photo of that Cherokee in the ditch is what happened without doing engine warms. So, engine warm, plug fouling every 1,000 feet. Hot engine, no power, cold for 6 minutes. What can happen? Metal doesn't like being cooled down so very quickly. You can start damaging, cracking cylinders, stuff like that. Especially if you go back to full power. It's very suddenly. So engine warm every 1,000 feet. What we're going to do is full throttle for 2 to 3 seconds, and we're going to check that we're getting full power and then bring it back to idle. Cool. This will be the first time they've done the engine warm, so just take them through that. MFD to engine page for trouble checks. Obviously tours and habit as well when we're training and we're practicing this. We don't need all that distraction at 500 feet or above 500 feet. Monitor T's and P's if we're doing 5 in a row. We don't want to do very cold and then very quick climb and then cold again, so we're going to make sure we're monitoring the T's and P's in between every exercise practice that we do, and maybe even give it a couple of minutes running at normal temperatures, particularly if it's cold, a little bit colder or hotter than normal. Maybe it's an aircraft management thing, it's not here, but probably a good time to talk about the 500 feet. We do not go below 500 feet, unless we're in a low flying zone. If you get a student asking why do we go below 500 feet, and you'd say we've actually got paid for dual flights, the CA approved us to go a little bit below, but for solar you certainly can't. Human factors, stress. So for training, it's not going to be a huge issue, but for real life stress, unbelievable how much stress you'll get if this happens in real life. The key to making it successful is to have this procedure not necessarily as an automatic response, but something you practice in your current at, and it's something that is literally drilled into you, and you can recall all those items without having to struggle too much. If the last time you did a forced landing practice was your last BFR 2 years ago, and you get one, you're not going to be able to do it as well as if you're constantly keeping yourself current with it. Just like stalling, just like engine failure after takeoff, make sure you keep current with it. Overlearning everything on the ground, making sure you already have a bit of situational awareness about your height, the wind, that maybe places you might want to land before it actually happens. I wouldn't say this to students, but hey, our mid-air collision we had here was someone was doing a forced landing and there was traffic. They were descending, the other person was climbing, they couldn't see each other, but it was an issue of being in the same place doing these exercises. So really make sure you're aware of who's around you, who's below you. The TAS is great. If you haven't already, start incorporating the TAS as part of your lookout. So I start with it, and if there's nothing there, I'll just continue with my normal lookout. If there's something there, I'll note that when I get to that 1 o'clock or whatever, then I'll pause and actually sight the traffic. Cool? So it says the control to that, maybe, I don't know if that's the correct language, but yeah, passengers looking after, I've already kind of talked all this about all that stuff when we did the passenger brief. They should already be aware of that for a FATO. They shouldn't be doing anything different here. Touch checks only. Self-explanatory, just like your FATO. If we have done the whole thing, and I didn't do it because it takes too long, but if we were to carry on, put all of the bits and pieces in there, I wouldn't be doing this slide. I might even just finish it there, hit the little black screen thing and say, well, go away and learn the procedure. But if you haven't got anything on the board and you want to go through it, we can do a bit of back and forth. Hey, what's the first thing we do? Immediate actions. 2 is plan approach. 3, and it's on the speaker notes here. Plan the approach, pick the field. So all of these come up. So I'm not doing the right thing. Assess, make sure you've got a plan to get to your high key area. Trouble checks, assess, mayday call, assess. Shutdown checks, flat, land, success. Again, I wouldn't bother with it, I've already got it on the board, finish it there. I wouldn't put this up either, but you can if you want. So this is essentially just later in the training, we'll look at these. Again, more mountain flying stuff will be here and cover it. Happy with that?
Yep.
So that's an hour and 4 minutes. You've probably got maybe a little bit longer with the students. Hopefully everything's done right. Yeah, you've got a big picture here of all the points. Bit of scribble on there, it's all good, but something hopefully your students can take away. Generally for homework for this one, it will be, I want you to learn the pattern and the immediate actions and the troubleshooting, something along those